Hello and welcome to the Casually Hardcore Podcast. My name is Brian, and I want to give you guys a little heads up on an editor's note. This podcast does include profanity. We've decided to leave it in because, in context, it would throw things off. However, we do hope that you end up enjoying the show. If you have little ones present, you might want to make sure that you listen to this and enjoy this at a later time. Thank you very much and enjoy the podcast.
That's not useful. That's not interesting. That's not my style. I don't know. Like, it's cool for other people to do it. Don't get me wrong. But personally, there are certain games where the community is strong enough and the game itself is in a certain place where you owe it sort of like the respect to do that. And I feel like Warframe was one that I did that. And I mean, I only put like 70 hours into that game when I first reviewed it, but that's still a fairly big chunk of time. And and I feel like and I connected with the community and I really put in that effort to do that. And I think that review really landed well for that reason. I do feel as though engaging communities is super important, right? I've certainly seen some reviews of a game like Final Fantasy where I look at the review and I'm like, there is no way you spoke to the community, because if you did speak to the community, there's no way you would say these things, you know? I feel as though when you're taking on these larger projects to like review something that's already there, if you just review it in isolation, it's very foolish. Yeah. It's fine, actually. I find it's okay so long as you don't do it at the very front of the
You're
video.
Australian.
Yeah, that's true, actually. The whole algorithm's different for us. they're like, what? There's no swearing in this video? That's so weird. Delete it. It must be fake. You know?
This is not
They're
posted
using
by
a
Skillup.
VPN. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Casually Hardcore Podcast, episode 38. Joining me this week, we're very happy to welcome Skillup to the program. Thank you, Skillup, for making the time to come talk to us today about video game reviews and Final Fantasy XIV. If you guys aren't following Skillup, be sure to check the links below. Go follow him on YouTube, follow him on Twitch. I have to say, I'm going to kind of praise you just for a second, and I want you to kind of take over and introduce yourself. For those who might not have heard of you, I think Skillup has fundamentally reshaped what it means to do video game reviews. We don't always agree, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about gaming and gaming culture, but you make it so that I understand where you come from. I can understand how you came to the conclusions that you came to, and I don't know, like, what, first question right out of the gate, like, how did you stumble into that format? Because it feels so right at the same time, like, why isn't that the way it is?
Well,
question.
That's a huge question. Yeah. So first of all, hello everyone, and like, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I've been watching you guys for a while, actually, during the whole Final Fantasy journey, and stumbled upon you guys, and yeah, really appreciate your content. Always found it really informative and clearly laid out, and you sort of mix in a good amount of opinion there as well, which means I kind of like learn about what's going on in the game, but also like learn about how it's being received by the community and that sort of stuff. So yeah, really great resource, and just want to say thanks for all your videos. So but yeah, like, as for me, look, I don't know, I just feel like in terms of reviews, I think how would I say it? I didn't really even plan on doing reviews when I started YouTube. It kind of just became a thing where I'm like, all right, I think I have more stuff to say about video games that I'm not currently saying, because I was only talking about The Division. But I really hated how mechanical reviews were as I saw them. And I think they still are today in large part, which is like, we're going to talk through the graphics and we're going to talk through the sound and whatever else. And I'm not saying that reviews that do that are bad. Don't get me wrong, because there are lots of creators that I really respect that do exactly that. And I think that plays an important function. But for me personally, it just never made sense. And the most important article that I've ever read about video game criticism was an article called If Movies Were Reviewed Like Video Games. And it basically is this parody article that kind of lists, like, the actors can be clearly heard at all times. The sound of the explosions sound real, It's a very sort of like mechanical review of a film without actually discussing the film. And I feel like a lot of video game reviews tend to do that, where they're like, here's all this extra stuff that we just need to like talk about to fill airspace. but we haven't really got into like the crux of what it, what this video game's about, and sort of like imparting a part of that feeling to the audience as they watch the review. I want them to experience part of the video game as they watch the review. That's the intent. And I think that's sort of what I go in to do when I try and review. So that was the foundation of my approach. And yeah, I think it's been okay so far.
I definitely agree. Now, before we kind of do the rest of our little intro piece here, we're going to just kind of have it be a little bit more conversational than it is a function here. Who do you, like from a review perspective, who do you go to for your video game reviews? Like, plug whoever you want, because I'm just curious. Because I go to you.
Yeah, sure. So, no, I definitely watch a guy called, well, obviously most people would know ACG. I watch him very regularly. He is, I think, one of the best, if not the best, independent game reviewers out there. And I say that knowing that he is exactly what I just described in terms of that very mechanical approach to reviews. But he's so thorough and and there's just such a sense of due diligence that goes into what he does, that I really appreciate everything he puts out. It's a very, very quality product, so I definitely recommend him. I think the best video game reviewer working right now is actually Dunkey. I think if anyone watches any of Dunkey's stuff, you know exactly what Dunkey thinks about it. You know exactly what that game is about. You are left with a sense of the experience because he shows you its most sort of like special, poignant, funny, ridiculous, over-the-top moments. In 6 minutes, he sums up a game better than I could do in like 60 minutes, So I think that he is really, really just fantastic in that regard and so underappreciated. I would say that I really like Jim Sterling's commentary. His reviews, I would say, I don't necessarily think he's a great reviewer per se, because he really does a lot of impressions. And I really just like his impressions because I just like Jim's thoughts. I just think Jim thinks interesting things and he just says them. And I'm like, that's interesting, So while I don't agree with all of it, it's just interesting to watch him do his thing, So I really like that. I really like Angry Joe. I really feel like Angry Joe and I just always agree on things. Like, I just feel like we have the same perspective and he explains it in a different way. He's got his own style or whatever. But I think when Joe suits up and does a full-on Angry Joe review, it's 99% of the time, on point. It's exactly what I agree with. So I think as a, video game commentator and reviewer, I think he's really awesome. Yeah, I mean, look, then there's guys like Racevic. I'm not sure if you know Racevic. If you haven't, go and check him out. He is so good. He does, I guess you could call them reviews, but they're more documentaries where he'll spend an hour doing like, Mass Effect 10 years later kind of thing, which becomes a review of the game, obviously, because he's really breaking it down. But it's got this tremendous production value and scripting and insight, and it's just a great watch. So it's like Raycevick. He's probably my favorite in terms of like that sort of content, And yeah, I'd say they're probably the ones that I look to the most. Whenever they put up anything, I just immediately click and I'm like, cool, I'm going to get a good experience out of this. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. There's a couple that I hadn't heard of. Obviously, I've heard of Angry Joe and several, so sure. I'll ensure and include the links for anybody who's interested to these guys' channels that he recommends, so you guys can check them out as well. Now, as far as this podcast, this is a conversational podcast. We're going to be focusing in on Final Fantasy XIV for this episode because obviously we've all played it, and I'm assuming you're going to put out a review, but no pressure. I have no envy to you, sir, at all. So beyond that, you can find the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, everywhere podcasts are found. Be sure to give us a rating. Apparently, that's something that is good. So we haven't been asking people to do that, but we'll do it today. If you missed our last episode, we had Spofi on talking about Final Fantasy 14 patch 5.1 and when it is okay and when's a good time to take breaks. Next week, we're actually going to be welcoming Az from Heel vs. Babyface back on to do a WoW Classic focus show, as that seems to be a hot topic right today. Now, we do want to thank our partners with Exit Lag and Shadow PC. Links are in the description below if you guys want to check them out for a reduction in lag gaming and or Shadow Cloud gaming, which is something I've been moved to pretty much 100% of my time. Being here in Texas, it's been a dream. It's not ready for the world, but if you live near a data center, it is cloud gaming, dude. For me, it's legit. I've been playing on my laptop downstairs, Gears 5. literally my laptop is cold, battery lives forever because it's not processing the game, running the game. Like it's incredible. But obviously, the technology, especially over the United States, it's got a long way to go, and it's something so interesting. What's up?
Try Australia, man. I wonder.
We've
I hope I'm alive when the technology is good enough, the internet is good enough in Australia to be able to utilize that technology. That'll be great.
Now, from 14, forgive me if you don't know this individual, but have you met or talked with Ethis Asher at all? Another fellow Australian 14 player?
We've never actually spoken. I mean, we've done like tweets back and forward, and I've rated his stream a couple of times, but we've never actually properly spoken. So
yeah,
I actually don't know where he lives, but I think I'm going to meet up with him at PAX this year in Australia. So
yeah, cool. I hope you do, because he's also kind of referenced that, obviously the internet, the lag, the latency, especially with 14. Yeah. Maybe we get some love in the Australia with the data center, or who knows. But he talked about you don't play Ninja, because from a latency perspective, Ninja is not the way to go if you're Australian. And so, I always just think it's interesting, because I've seen y'all tweet back and forth, but I was like, oh man, that's a common complaint I've heard. And obviously,
I use a ping reduction thing. Like, I literally pay $10 a month for a service that will reduce my ping somewhat, but it is noticeable. Like, when I don't play with it, I can't then do any double weaves on my Dragoon. But when I do play with it, then I can just squeeze in a double weave, even though I'm like clipping my GCD a little bit. But yeah, like it's a thing. The internet here definitely affects playstyle for sure.
So we got our... Go ahead, Chris.
That seems hard. Heal Me Harry's another Australian creator. He just he's been living in Europe for a while now. And I think he's really enjoyed his ping being higher on most games, but then he's continued to play 14 on the same servers. Right. So somehow found a way to have the same ping issue, because now he's just gone too far the other way.
Yeah.
So I'd be remiss, because a lot of people, when we were saying that you're coming on, they're like, okay, you got to ask Ralph about this. You got to ask him about this. And he says, so I got a couple community questions before we kind of dive into our big topic here. Why do you hate Lise?
Lisa's the worst character, man. Like, she's just the worst. I don't understand how she's so bad. Like, I can't understand the anatomy of her badness. Like, as I look back at my experience with Stormblood, I'm like, why did I hate Lise so much? But every time she spoke, I was like, that was so unnecessary. Every time she added anything to the conversation, it was like, no, you didn't need to say that. We already know. We don't care, whatever else. So then it just became a meme. I think it kind of took on a life.
I always think, I think when I think of the clenched fist meme, there's a lot of my memory of Stormblood of like, she's frustrated and you get
sure. I think she had like 2 good moments in the whole 70-hour experience where I was like, yeah, go Lise. And the rest of it, I was just like, no, Lise, please stop. Just no. Let other people do the thing. I feel bad. Obviously,
I always felt like
there were definitely some Lise stands in the chat, and so they were definitely not huge fans of me by the end of the Stormblood experience. So
that's funny. So is Y'shtola the best waifu?
I feel yes, to be honest. I was a big fan of Minfilia in Realm Reborn, which I know is a very unpopular opinion. People are like, why? And I was like, I don't really know why, to be honest. It just worked for me, right? And then Y'shtola went through a whole jazz up experience, and I'm like, all right, I see it now. I see it. Because Y'shtola at the beginning, I was like, why is everyone talking about Y'shtola? Why is everyone calling Y'shtola best waifu? It makes no sense to me. But now, having played Shadowbringers, I'm like, it makes sense to me. Definitely makes sense.
As a legacy player in the room right here, Minfilia went under a massive change from 1.0 to 2.0. If you ever go see screenshots, they made her very well endowed as a part of 2.0, and it was legitimately wait a minute, okay. So I know a lot of it's Google it, because it's okay. it's
not at work though, not at work.
Incognito.
Incognito for sure. I know. Yeah, we could totally derail the whole podcast off of that alone, but it was just all right, Square. Okay, moving on.
Yeah, sure.
Why do you hate Gabu?
He's such a gross little rodent. He was so gross. Every time he was on screen, it was like this twitching little rat thing that's just gross. I don't understand why everyone liked him so much. I was like, yuck, just get him off the screen. I didn't want anyone, my characters, to touch him. I didn't want anyone to go near him. He was gross, okay? So it's weird. No, just Gabu bad.
So this is going to be the challenge question. And again, you don't have to, you could totally change your mind on this one. Rank the expansions from greatest to least, and this is going to be a room wide question because the first three were kind of for you, but Skill Up, like you've played all four like of it when I think of expansions because in my mind from 1.0 I think of 2.0 as kind of the continuation.
Sure.
Rank without ranking 1.0.
Yeah.
What do you think? What's the from greatest to least?
Do you want me to go first?
Yes, please.
Oh yeah, sure. So I would say, I think Shadowbringers was genius from a writing perspective. I mean, it was incredible. Some of the stuff, just the themes and how well they were executed was just brilliant. You know, the entire way through. I also think just the spectacle of it, of like your trials and your like your dungeons and what have you. The music was insane. All of it is, I think, objectively, you would look at Shadowbringers and say it is the best expansion. However, I feel as though Heavensward was where I kind of like fell in love with Final Fantasy, and it was kind of like, all right, now I get it. And I just loved the Dragonsong War story. Even though I think the Shadowbringers story is better written, I think that expansion is better structured. The way it all comes together, the way it just fits so beautifully, and the environment, everything is objectively better. I just think that sort of high gothic fantasy of the Dragonsong War with those characters, Estenine and Baemeric and Nidhogg and all that. Like, I just love that. It's my favorite. It is my favorite. So while I would say Shadowbringers is better, I would say that like Heavensward definitely holds more a place in my heart personally. And then Stormblood, lol. Like, Stormblood is like way down there. Like there's like Shadowbringers and Heavensward, and then there's like way off screen. Then there's Stormblood. So, which is a very unpopular opinion.
No, it's not. You're among friends right here. I do appreciate that there are people who really appreciate Stormblood, but yeah. What about ARR? So would you say ARR is better than Stormblood?
No, I think Stormblood is better. I think certainly Stormblood had some really great trials and some beautiful dungeons. The locations, the underwater stuff, I thought was fantastic. Yeah, like it had some really great. Like A Realm Reborn really sucks. Let's be real. Like just putting it out there. It was such a painful experience. You know what I mean? There were moments where I was like, this is cool. Like the first time you fight Titan or Ifrit. The trials essentially, and then the last cutscene with Raban, and that's it. Do you know what I mean? Like the rest of it was just a lot of pain, and I really hope that they're able to restructure the game massively, because I feel like A Realm Reborn is just shooting that game in the foot big time. If people could get straight into Heavensward, I think it would just unlock so much of the potential of Final Fantasy XIV for people who have no chance of getting through 120 hours of what A Realm Reborn is, because I really believe it is not good. So yeah,
Chris.
But I mean, like, the MMO itself is good. Like the MMO components, like the classes and stuff. But even then, like the classes do not reveal themselves to you in A Realm Reborn. Like, I mean, yeah, the way that I'm playing Dragoon now is so completely different. Like when I get scaled down, when I'm doing like queues and stuff now, and I go back to like a level 50 Dragoon, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, this. And then I go back to like a level 30 Dragoon. I'm like, holy shit, this is boring. You know? Right. But now I'm playing Dragoon at level 80. I'm like, this is fucking, excuse me, I'm like, this is amazing. I love this shit. Like when you perfectly execute your combo and you just, it feels amazing. So the MMO foundations, the game itself, good, but A Realm Reborn as an experience, I don't think, not good.
Chris, how about you?
So I think Shadowbringers has done a lot. It's a total game changer. And while I agree that a skip potion to Heavensward would be a good step in that direction, if you're just giving them out and saying, hey, with New Game Plus, you can go back and play it whenever you want, I would say just skip people straight into Shadowbringers, give them like some Hall of the Novice entry to the game, and then just drop them in. The zones are incredible. The class balance feels good. It'll never be perfect, so I know there's a handful of people out there who play a class could be better right now, and it will always be somebody. It will always be somebody. So I'm in general really happy with the game. It's making me want to play parts of the game that maybe I ignored leading up until now, and I think a lot of that comes out of like Heavensward was my second favorite. Heavensward was when I really started dumping a silly amount of time into this game, and I started really looking forward to playing a lot. Stormblood Brian, if you hadn't been subscribed and we hadn't had a channel that supported us and had a community that gave me things to be passionate about and asked questions that made me go, I wonder. I think if I'd just been alone in my room with Stormblood, there were a lot of good games that came out in that 2-year period that I could have shifted my focus to. I would probably put ARR above Stormblood, not as current content, but at content for that time. When I joined ARR at that time, that's what I expected from MMOs. They were very grindy, and I was playing with friends. We played literally like 4 hours on the same night every week, and then I played all the time. There were people to voice chat with throughout the week. So just for me, it was a really like wonderful part of my life. It was just a great 2 year. Just like when I look back on like vanilla, whether or not people are enjoying classic, that aside, I'd always said like vanilla and the Burning Crusade were really pivotal points in like my gaming time, just as a person and as I guess like a gaming career or whatever you'd call it. So I think ARR was that to me. I don't know that it's aged well at all, and like
it has not. It has not.
Skip it. So I definitely feel for people, and I don't think that you can go back and have the experience I had, because that's not what games are anymore. I mean, it's been long enough, and they've learned enough that it's time to move on. So I would probably put Stormblood last, honestly, for me, if I'm rating each of them during the time when they were current. Now, if I have to be level synced into something, I would way rather be level synced into Stormblood content than ARR.
I feel that is so interesting looking at the WoW Classic success story right now and how great it is. Because I've dabbled in a bit of WoW Classic the last few weeks as well. I'm literally like level 5 or something, so almost nothing.
Yeah, we're in the same. We're in the same space.
Yeah,
we're in the same space. I have no nostalgia for WoW. My bay was Final Fantasy 11. And,
right. Okay.
You know, so it's like, and then I was like, obviously that's not going to work today, but where I go in and start playing classic, I'm like, I'm blown away. But I cut you off, Skill. Go ahead.
That's fine. No, I was purely going to say, because I was a beta WoW player. I mean, I played WoW for like 14 years, super hardcore progression rated. That was my life. And going back to classic, it still holds a lot of charm, and it's aged perfectly. Because I feel like, and in contrast to something like A Realm Reborn, because A Realm Reborn is very much like, it's their story, it's Square's story that you're playing, and you are just sort of along for the ride, and you are the hero at the center of it, don't get me wrong, but there's no agency at all, and you can't really do it with friends, and there aren't moments that you can kind of create for yourself, like, oh, I didn't expect that to happen, in terms of like, you create something. There's tons of story stuff that's super surprising, but it's like, it's all just the story that Square gives you. And I think the thing about WoW Classic is that it's its own sort of like organic story making machine, where you can have unexpected experiences at any point in your journey, grouping up with people, doing random quests together, pulling a group of mobs that you didn't expect would KO you. You thought you'd be okay, but you weren't. You get a random BOE drop. You go and do some like open world PvP in Hillsbrad for a while, all that sort of stuff. And I think that's why, WoW Classic has aged so well, is because you still can make those stories happen so organically. And I feel as though that's why A Realm Reborn doesn't age, because I think it's a boring story that's being told, versus like Heavensward ages beautifully, because it's still an incredible story, an incredible world with music and what have you. But I think A Realm Reborn story is fundamentally just not that interesting. And so to have to sit through it for 120 hours, it's kind of like, I don't know about this. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's an interesting contrast that I see between the two.
I hadn't thought about that. I don't have any of my ARR items in my inventory that I know of. If they are, they're there by accident. But I can tell you that my retail character still has the first blue that ever dropped for me. Like a
totally.
Or blue. I have my Twig of the World tree. It was the first ever blue item. I used it from whatever level range that is. I don't even think it's level 60. And like I just, and it just meant so much. And like, as tight as inventory space was until honestly like Wrath, I felt inventory space was always tight. I never got rid of that blue. And I never had that attachment to something that was like uniquely my experience. Like nobody else is like, oh, I have my Twig of the World tree too. Like that's a weird thing. That's uniquely me. And I think that is something that's a really interesting thing to key in on.
Yeah. I mean, like I could name dozens of items from WoW. I can't really name any items from Final Fantasy. And that's not necessarily inherently a bad thing. Like they've got different focuses for sure. But my point with this is that they're very, very different games that I think are today equally successful. classic WoW and Shadowbringers, as I think of the sort of contemporary elements. I think BFA is a whole other separate discussion. But they're both successful for doing something very, very different. And I think it is about sort of like Shadowbringers tells you this incredible story that you're a part of on top of a very, very functional MMO. But I think something like WoW Classic sort of allows you to create a lot of your own stories quite organically on top of a pretty functional MMO. You know, obviously there's some pretty broken shit in there because it's classic, but like that's part of the charm, you know? Yeah.
So like there's my thesis about it is that I say, or at least the hypothesis is that WoW Classic right now is challenging how we read data. You know, because obviously the classic quote, you think you do, but you don't. You know, that is essentially what is on the table. You know, are they correct? Is the data and how they've interpreted it correct? Or is there really a market and a hunger for something like WoW Classic? And foundationally, it's going to be, I think, 6 months, and then we'll know. And then it will be whether if people are still playing, if it's still functional. That's just how I see it, because I mean, data is everywhere. Like it is the new oil. There's so much of it that we give away, and algorithms interpolate it and produce like, oh, this is what people like. This is what is fun. And that's where I think the biggest critique about BFA has come in, is that they see people like, well, everybody's playing it for this amount of time. You got this much watch time on your video. Obviously you're having like, how they're trying to interpolate fun. And it feels like that it's that, have they lost their way? And that's going to be the question. And so for me, as somebody who's just dabbling in it and having a good time every time I play, because like you said, yeah, like I'm kind of creating my own story. And there's also the world that's going on. And then I'm excited that people are excited, and I really hope that they stick with it, because I hope that it sends a pretty loud message as about what it means to be an MMO. And that's where I see, like, I don't know if it's going to change the future, but I think that there's a lot of hope that people think that there was a mistake that was made at some point, and BFA wasn't the problem. The problem was, for maybe expansions prior, but it was just building up, and the sunken costs that people have, like even with Fortnite, like the sunken, like, oh, I'm already invested in this, I can't leave it just yet. Eventually caught up to them, and all of a sudden they're shocked. Why are so many people leaving this game?
Yeah. I mean, I think Final Fantasy 14 has certainly illuminated for me many of the reasons why I think Classic is attractive, because I think if you look at just the complexity of class design as one thing, like I'm still learning Dragoon. Do you know what I mean? To this day, I've not perfected my rotation. I know what I should be doing every time, but I'm getting it wrong more often than not. And that's just one class, and then there are all the others. And then there's every encounter. I need to know exactly how I alter my cooldown timers on each encounter, and how to dance properly in Innocence, which, by the way, I hate that fight. And, all that sort of complexity exists. And then there's crafting. Like, holy shit, like it's so, so complex. I've just started dabbling in crafting, and that's just at the very beginning. It gets way more complex later on. It's a game that doesn't shy away from that complexity. And I think WoW currently, as in like BFA, completely shies away from complexity, stupidly so. Playing my shaman on live WoW now is a joke. Like, it's a 4-button class, and I mean, and 80% of the time it's 1 button. And they've just stripped so much out of each of the classes, and so much out of the professions, and just so much out of the game that you're kind of like, ugh, there's nothing here to really grab onto, So I think that what is great about Classic is that it has a lot of complexity in terms of how to play a class properly. But at the same time, it's like, it's still accessible. It still works. It's not overwhelming. And they also don't pile all this grind requirement on you, which I think is actually the reason that WoW sucks so much right now. And again, one of the reasons that I love Final Fantasy so much, Yoshi's statement, like, he doesn't want Final Fantasy to be a game you have to play every day. He wants it to be something you can just enjoy and dabble in whenever you like and still make progress. BFA, everyone thinks that like BFA is really casual because like it's simple. BFA is not casual at all. Like, it's extremely hardcore, because if you want to play it and get the most out of it, you need to dump so many hours into leveling up all of your shit, and that's just for one character. If you have an ult, you need to do everything all over again. Like, you're just constantly on this like treadmill of grind in WoW at the moment, and it's just overwhelming, and it's boring because most of it's daily quests, And I think, again, Final Fantasy doesn't do any of that shit, and it works so beautifully. And that's one of the things that I love most about it. So I really feel as though Classic WoW and Final Fantasy, the success of both of those games, I hope really shows Blizzard how off course they've gone with BFA and helps them sort of be like, okay, we need to really, re-steer the ship here because it's definitely not working.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Chris, it looks like you have a thought before I jump into my ranking.
I agree with 99% of that. The one thing I don't agree with is that Classic's not grindy. I think there's just an inherent difference. They've made the grind fun, and that comes from, there's an interview they put out where they put some of the original devs in the room playing WoW Classic. Very interesting. I don't feel that they we got the whole side of the story, so I had a lot of questions at the end. But one of the things that I thought was interesting is that they thought the World of Warcraft's most important character was the world itself. Yes. That you're experiencing this huge open space, that when you run from one place to another, there isn't any quick way to get there. I mean, even once you get Flight Pass unlocked, they take forever. And so there's just this immersion and this experience that kind of drives you through. And so I do think it's grindy. I just think that the word grindy has grown and evolved to mean this chore that you have to do to get to the fun. And theirs is it's a huge grind, but the payoff isn't just locked at the end and you're putting in your chores. The payoff is oh, come out and do this task with me. And the task itself is also very fun. You have people who are level 20 and they're like, yeah, I'm having all this fun. You're not even close to cap. You're not, and 20 is a third of 60, but you are not even close to a third of the way there. You're maybe 10% of the way there, but you're having fun anyway. There's these moments that get created along the way, which you were talking about with where I was killing stuff on stream, pulling these centaurs one at a time because they were wrecking me. I could barely pull two, but I only wanted to pull one in case a second came. And three spawned behind me, on top of me, all swung their axe, instant dead. Now I have to run back from a graveyard eternally far. Yeah. That's just a huge waste of time.
Yep.
But somehow I'm not upset. And so I think what's unique is that it is a grind. I just, out of all of that,
No, I know what you mean. And I should probably rephrase. It definitely is a grind to level up. Don't get me wrong. But I'm actually talking more about the end game, because when you get to end game WoW, it's actually not as grindy, because it's kind of like you do MC, you might want to farm a bit for some professions or whatever. That's about it. You know what I mean? Until some other content comes along. Versus with WoW today, you need to do your raids each week. You need to also do daily quests every single day to max up your, Heart of Azeroth. You need to get your Mythic Plus dungeons done because you need your item. If you want it, that's just for getting professions as well. If you want to get into that, and that's all just for one character. And if you want to get progress on another character, you have to do all of that all over again. So I feel as though, definitely agree that the grind is there on the level up. It's a good 250 hours of just killing mobs, but you're right. You're having fun while you're doing it. So it feels like less of a grind. And even then when you get to the end game, it's I just think it's a very different value proposition versus what WoW currently is trying to do in BFA.
So talking of value proposition, what is the best way to kind of pivot as we pivot here? What is the best way to kind of show that to somebody? What's the best way in a review? We use these 1 out of 10 scores or whatever.
Sure.
That means that if a game is a 9, this other game, if it feels better than that game, it has to be higher than a 9. So how do you avoid this score creep? How do you show the objective value in a game when you're comparing games that are so different? I mean, even just Classic and Final Fantasy, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've really, I don't know, I personally don't worry about a lot of that stuff, because a lot of the comment section in my videos will be like, you said this about this game, and now you're saying this about that game. You're a hypocrite. You're inconsistent, blah, 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 blah. And I guess, you can't worry about that sort of thing, purely because every single game is different. Every single game is its own unique experience. It's games are art. It's you wouldn't compare painting brush strokes on one canvas to another and say, well, they're because the brush strokes are this and that, therefore, but it's different. Every artist uses it differently, and the whole experience becomes different when you combine it in different ways, and etc. So I feel your question was how do you explain that value proposition relative to something else? I don't really think it's about saying, well, we need to worry about this other thing. I think we just say, well, this is what it is. Do you know what I mean? And you can obviously make comparisons to other stuff. I recently did a review of Greedfall, and I would very often refer back to BioWare games, because I'm this is a point of reference for the audience. But I didn't say I didn't like Greedfall because it wasn't Dragon Age. I said I didn't like Greedfall because it was these are the reasons I don't like it. I don't think it's worth your time. So yeah, I think that mechanical frameworks for reviews, like scores and processes and all that sort of stuff, like trying to arrive at the universal formula for the unified game review theory, it doesn't exist. Do you know what I mean? It's like all of that stuff is so, I think, personally pointlessly academic, and that's one of the reasons I don't score games. Let's just talk about a game, and you know what I mean. You'll come to your own view about what it is, and you share that with someone. And as long as you can explain why you've arrived at that point, then they can make their own decisions. And that's why personally I think scores are kind of like, I get it. I get why they exist. I get why they're helpful. I certainly wouldn't want to see them removed, but they certainly are of no interest to me. I just think that really limits the scale of discussion, the scope of discussion. It really sort of like narrows the audience's mind unnecessarily when I'm trying to make sure that like their minds are as open as possible when I talk about something.
Let's talk about streaming for a second, though, because essentially that is something. Let's talk about the concept of streaming as it relates to reviews, though, because essentially the review, a lot of people are looking for something out of it. And one of the things you brought up, which I find very like humorous, because I see it. I did a first impressions of Gears 5, and one of the comments, is like, how much did Microsoft pay me to speak about this game positively? And I'm like, I would cash that check. Phil Spencer just needs to bring Final Fantasy 14 to the Xbox. I'll call it even. But it's like, I'm sitting here like, people are going out of their way to try and discount an opinion, which I just think is hilarious. And I don't express that to the commenter, but in my mind, I read that and I audibly like just like almost fall out of my chair because it's an opinion. It's like you said, like a work of art. Like it's like, okay, so I don't understand the need to discount and to find any which way like to do that. And so essentially to that, like where you're saying like, oh, you said this here and here, you're a hypocrite. It's like, it looks like they're just trying to find a way to not agree with what you're saying. And then I'm wondering like, okay, well, why are you here? But beyond that, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you, but
please.
I just think when it comes to YouTube, and certainly because I've been doing YouTube for 4 years now. And I think at the beginning I was very much like, I need to make sure that, my arguments are watertight, and I need to make sure that, that I prove I'm right. I need to prove I'm right, and I think now I'm very much just like, I just need to prove why I think what I think. And a lot of the audience is not going to be capable of grasping that as a concept. And they're going to say, you're wrong because of X, Y, Z or whatever else. And they're going to attack you. That's fine. Do you know what I mean? Like it's, as I said, you go and read my Greedfall review. It's nothing but people just being like, you're a contrarian for the sake of it. This is ridiculous. Did you even play the game? Like the entire thing, it's a lot of abuse in there because I was like, look, this is a pretty good game, but I just don't think it's that good overall. I wouldn't recommend it to you. Back in the day, I think that would have really gotten to me because I'd obviously think, oh, I've really fucked up now and I've done the wrong thing. But now I'm just like, yeah, cool. That's okay. That's all right. A lot of those people aren't really going to ever be able to buy into the way that I'm talking about this thing. It's not my job to sort of speak to them. It's my job to speak to the 85% of people that do get it and that are on board for that journey and are interested in hearing different opinions. Because I think, generally speaking, if you worry yourself with the 15% of people who are aggressive towards you or whatever else, then you're just wasting your time. You're not really doing anything. It's the same with game devs when they kind of like yell at the 5% of the community that are toxic. It really just makes them look like they're tarring the other 95%. So I personally try and focus on the 85%, I think, the 90%, 95 hopefully, who are on board. And the other ones, I think you just got to ignore and move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I always have a curious and inquisitive nature in the regards of, I always want to understand, was it that you believe that this game would be great, or you're hoping this game is going to be great, or that and if it's that you feel this game is going to be great, like that's where I always try to see if I can't change that kind of that narrative to say like, what did you like about the game, in that regards. And sometimes, and my wife, she's like, Brian, you're fighting a losing battle, and I'm like, totally. That's the hill I would happily, if ever history remembers me, happy to die on. That it's like, what, he tried.
As I say, that's the thing, and I think back in the day I did try before I realized that the most important thing for you to do is to just put your own view out there as honestly as possible. So long as you've played the game
Mhm.
and you really believe what you think and you're fair and sort of like, you're fair in what you say, then I think that's it, and if anyone wants to come at you and be like, you've lost touch, man, you're like, okay, cool, that's fine, but you focus on the people that I think are really connecting with what you have to say. I think that's the way to grow a community. It's not by like arguing with the trolls, it's by sort of like those that are on board.
Do you have a secret way that keeps that kind of compass on point, that keeps you objective, that keeps you from, losing? I mean, you have huge projects that you take on. So like if you were to get dissuaded, if you were to get like just burned out and you just disappear into a hole, we would never see your review on something because it already takes you so long. So like what keeps motivation and that objectivity on point?
On the 14 concept, 362 hours. I believe that's what you said to finish.
Hey, let's see. What have I got now? I was 362 and I leveled. Now I've got 441. So now it's still going.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I feel like there are certain games where you really owe it to the game to do that. I think if I was to put out a review of Final Fantasy where I just played a bit of it and, I leveled up a class to level 40 and, whatever else, that's not useful. That's not interesting. That's not my style. I don't know. Like, it's cool for other people to do it, don't get me wrong. But personally, there are certain games where the community is strong enough and the game itself is in a certain place where you owe it sort of like the respect to do that. And I feel like Warframe was one that I did that. And I mean, I only put like 70 hours into that game when I first reviewed it, but that's still a fairly big chunk of time. And and I feel like and I connected with the community and I really put in that effort to do that. And I think that review really landed well for that reason. I do feel as though engaging communities is super important, right? I've certainly seen some reviews of a game like Final Fantasy where I look at the review and I'm like, there is no way you spoke to the community, because if you did speak to the community, there's no way you would say these things. I feel as though when you're taking on these larger projects to like review something that's already there, if you just review it in isolation, it's very foolish because you can't see all of it. You can't understand it. But if you take the time to connect with community, they show you things, they teach you things and they help you, they help you connect with stuff. And I feel that invariably results in a better review. I know some people will say, well, you're just sort of like telling the community what they want to hear. It's like, well, no, I have lots of criticisms of Final Fantasy and I'll certainly say those, but I'm going to have so much more stuff to say that I wouldn't have known about had the community not led me there. And I think that's so important.
Yeah, the community is an important aspect. I'm going to toss to Chris because you look like you're about to say something, but I do want to take a moment to speak on that. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I just kind of wonder if the community becomes that identifying trait to a game once it's established, or if there's still something that can ring out as more important. Like, when you go into an MMO at this point, is the content the devs put out the most important thing, or does that community, does what that game is played as, that I would say meta, but not necessarily how they play, but the community as a whole, does that become the identifying trait on whether or not it's going to be a good fit?
A good fit for
anybody. If you're recommending a game to me, are you going to base that on like the mechanics of the game, or does the community actually weigh out more where you're like, I really like this, but I'm not sure that that's a community that has the same values, that's looking for the same experience you are?
I don't know. I've never really judged a game based on its community. Like, I think you can look at games like League or, Overwatch, Rainbow Six Siege, like, holy shit, anything really competitive. And you're like, the community really is not the best, but they're all brilliant games in their own way, So personally, I would never judge a game based on community, but I would certainly take community input into that. And I think if it's a strength, it's a strength. Like with Warframe, I was able to say, and Destiny, for example, when I did my review of Destiny 1, I'm like, this game has a pretty fucking awesome community. If you get on board with this game and you connect with people, you're going to be really surprised by who you meet. They're really great people. It's just got a great vibe to it, and that was definitely true in Destiny 1. It's absolutely true now with Destiny 2, even though the game has gone through hell and back, So I would say that, community is a factor that I would look at and I would mention. I would say, hey, listen, if you're going to play Siege properly, get ready for the chat. You know what I mean? Like, you got to saddle up for that. But I wouldn't say don't play Rainbow Six Siege because of the community, because I feel like everyone is adult enough most people are adult enough to be able to, mute chat if they need to, or if they like to get into Flame Wars, then like it's the game of the year for them. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's perfect.
Yeah, 14's community is really it's an interesting bag, having been a part of it for so long. I would describe it as incredibly beautiful, but at the same time very protective. You know, and so it's that there's another creator that we're not going to bring that whole thing up, but it's that, you know, he leveraged a mild critique, having played the game, spent the game, done a lot of these things, and there was a big amount of backlash, you know, and it's like, and it's a small part, and it's the thing I've always kind of told people whenever, like, you know, like, because it happened with my wife, and it's that my experiences within Final Fantasy 14, 99.9% of the time are just some of the best people. Everybody's trying to help each other out. Really, you know, and this is before I was a content creator, and even since then being a content creator, like being able to get together, I feel like I have the group of friends that I have has grown. It's those other opportunities that go south that stand out, because it is such a huge contrast, in my opinion. My wife, she took a break for a month from the game. We used to play together before we started, you know, multiplying, and so we were sitting here, and she was running Crystal Tower, and she was on a monk, and a monk piece of gear dropped, and she rolled need. And then somebody who was on Black Mage, like, just berated her, saying, like, I said I needed that. Like, I was playing, I didn't see his comment, like, because my wife's like, I would have let him have it. Like, I don't care. But it was like that moment, like, it was like, I will never forget that moment. Yet I have had millions and millions of great runs and no issues. But it's like, there is that kind of, that contrast that is kind of shocking. And so that's kind of one of the things that when it comes to the game, like, there is a protectionist perspective of it. And I don't know how that kind of developed, I guess because it wasn't necessarily the biggest MMO for a while, and then I believe it is or was, I don't know how we rate classic, but you know, it's like there is this sense that, like, oh, you know, when we talk about discounting, you know, games, like, okay, you're whatever, like, how much did so and so pay you to not rate that as perfect because I view it as perfect? It's like, all right, guys, like,
there's like, one of those comments in the chat, actually.
Yeah, I saw that. The funny thing about that comment is that I love Gears of War. I have loved the series from the beginning. I am a huge Gears head, and I'm like, yep, I can't pull myself away from Gears 5 right now. So you know, if you're getting checks,
I think in general, fantastic. Like, you know, look, everyone is, you know, passionate, and I think as well, certain games, obviously, they get that status where people begin to internalize them, and I think that's really the critical, like, inflection point. Mm-hmm. You know, people internalize something like Devil May Cry. People internalize things like, you know, Bayonetta. They'll internalize an MMO. You know, and at that point, it's sort of like, all right, cool. If you start speaking shit about it, then, you know, like, let's fight, you know, let's have it out, you know? So that's just a part of, I think, gaming cultures. It's not even just gaming. It's like any kind of pop culture, you know, it's like, you know, movies and comics and all that sort of shit. Like, it's just a part of it. So, yeah, look, I definitely have seen flashes of that in the Final Fantasy community. I don't think it's any different to, as I said, a lot of other communities. It really changes, though, when certain games don't have it, though. For example, WoW doesn't have this thing, right? WoW does not have this kind of defensiveness, because I think WoW's had so many people shit on it for so many years. It's part of the narrative. And I think it's actually the same with Destiny as well. And I really feel it's a case of, like, the Destiny fans know, or they're just so used to people shitting on their game that they're like, oh, well, that's just part of it. I just ignore them and I keep playing. Whereas perhaps with Final Fantasy, you know, or certain games where they're sort of more shielded from critique, that when people do start to critique it, they get very upset. Like Borderlands right now, I'm sort of very outspoken about the fact that I don't like their review process that they've gone through. I think it's extremely unethical, because they're basically giving code to people based upon their coverage. That's something that Giant Bomb was told personally by 2K. And that's straight up just unethical. And I know that I've been, sorry.
You're good.
I've been a victim of that sort of stuff myself all the time. I sit on many blacklists, don't get me wrong. I understand how this industry works. I'm not naive about that. But my point is that, like, you know, I start saying, hey, this sucks. And a lot of the Borderlands fans come at me and they're like, rah, rah, rah. Because again, Borderlands 2 is a game that does not get criticism. Everyone just universally agrees that Borderlands 2 is excellent.
Do you believe people have been playing Borderlands 2 for 7 years? Because that's one of the comments I got. They're like, people
absolutely
nonstop, never taking a break.
I have a lot of people in my my
Wow.
Steam friends list who do this. Yes, like to this day.
Well, tip of the hat to Borderlands 2. I'm like, I love it. Like Borderlands is like 2 was always the game for me. Like, hey, buds are over. All right, let's just hop on and let's blow stuff up and have a good old time. Like, we played a lot of it when it came out, but then it became a party game for us. And so I was like, yeah, this is great because they're not making content for it, and it's like, yeah, it is what it is. It is, it's this it's a timepiece. And that's incredible. Okay, cool. That helps settle this mystery. People are like, yeah, man, like I've played it every day for 7 years. And I'm like, well, tip of the hat. Cause it's like,
yeah. No, it's definitely a thing.
Oh
So I think, as I said, maybe it's just to do with a game and how often it's being attacked. And if it's not used to being attacked very often, like Final Fantasy XIV, which, has just sort of flown under the radar, I think it's really only been with Shadowbringers that it's bubbled up into the mainstream.
Yeah.
And now I think that community has to deal with other people coming in and being like, your game sucks. And it's like, what? I don't know how to deal with that. Oh my God. You know what I mean?
Well, especially with the challenge of ARR, like bringing it like back, full circle in a way. It's interesting because like as a rating, like I would say, Shadowbringers, Heaven's Word, and Heaven's Word was the number one. It was like, gosh, and that's where when going into Shadowbringer, Stormblood, I was like, okay, like, is this it? It's like it feels wrong, like it feels off, and I can't tell why. But we got to sit down with Yoshi P and talk about it, and it's really like they're doing their best, but the game has a huge amount of technical debt. It has a huge amount of technical debt because Yoshi P came in, stepped up, supported 1.0, built 2.0, like in 2 years. I'm a software engineer. I'm like, I don't envy what the blood and sweat and tears and the passion that they put in. But when you look at that, like they had no idea Heaven's Word was going to be a thing. They you couldn't count on it. So they were like, we have to get this working. We have to do this. So essentially you make compromises. And Yoshi Piece told us that like, yeah, back in patch 4.4, they went and reworked the whole Chocobo companion system. And that tells me that they're constantly going in and investing and trying to fix this framework for this Jenga tower that they're trying not to knock down. And it's that's a challenge in and of itself. And so like, if they bring the trust, people are like, are they bringing trust to the previous expansions? I think they need to, especially ARR. If they ever do that, it should be received as a love letter to the community because the devs have gone in and just poured themselves into that. Because it's not like, oh, just you've already made it, copy paste. It unfortunately doesn't work that way, and especially with their industry in and of itself. And so we do know with patch 5.3, they're talking about condensing kind of ARR and doing some stuff with that. So that should be next summer. Hopefully that's the thing. It'll be interesting to see because, Shadowbringers, I'm so excited to see what what's coming with 5.1, but even as we go into 6.0 and doing this all again, and then I think of, oh God, if I was going to tell somebody they need to get in and get through AR at least before they take a break, just so that they can be ready when 6.0 comes along, and then they can be like, great, I'm in Heaven's Word, and just move their happy little self forward. Anyway.
They really need, can I just say as well as a very side point, but
Please.
They really need a skip potion that gives you a level 50 class and gets you to Heaven's Word, because having to buy a skip potion for a level 70 class as well as the skip is bad. It's bad. So
Agreed.
I just really hope that Yoshi would do that.
Our theory,
right now it's terrible structure.
Our working theory is that once the New Game Plus is introduced, and we don't have confirmation it's 5.1, but they've said that they're targeting patch 5.1, that once that's introduced, then our working theory is that we will see that as a part of the bundle. I agree with you 100%. It needs to happen because then it gives people and players the ability to go back and experience it if they want to. Anyway, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what you wouldn't want to do is invite somebody into such a narrative based where the early expansions very much do feel like a movie series on Netflix that you happen to be holding a controller for sometimes. Yeah. And so like it literally tells you like, put your controller down, enjoy this cutscene because it's going to be long. And so, what you don't want to do is sell people a skip potion, new people who've never played this, new. And then they come in, they're like, I'm here for the story. And they're like, oh, well, you skipped a bunch. Yeah. Oh, well, how do I go back? Oh yeah, you can't. And so like you don't want to do that. And so I think New Game Plus would be a good reason to kind of open up the discussion on like, okay, is it time to start including jump potions with the purchase of the game, or including jump potions with purchase of expansion, things like that, which we saw World of Warcraft do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like pre-order or this or that, or there's a special like the starter edition doesn't do it, but like the full edition, here you go, and it comes with a jump potion skip.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's just how like we have no word if that's what they're going to do, but that's essentially what we're thinking of. Now, I want to ask this because it's like you've often referred to yourself jokingly as Shillup. Isn't everyone who expresses an opinion on the internet on somebody's payroll?
Certainly, if you look at comment sections, yes, definitely, no doubt about that. No, I mean, look, I think that for me personally, it's a criticism I get all the time. As I said, I'm on 4 blacklists from publishers that I had good relationships with, but that because I was honest about my coverage, ended up on blacklists. So I never really worry about that when people call me that. Like, it never even bothers me at all because they look at my Gears 5 review and they're like, well, that's it. You must have got a check from Microsoft, and it's like, well, actually, Gears 5 is a good game. Do you know what I mean? And if it was a shitty game, I'd say that. You know what I mean? I've said many times, Sea of Memes, like, I thought that was a shit game. Do you know what I mean? Like, State of Decay, whoa, God, that was bad. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll give credit when it's due, and obviously I will say it's shit when it's shit, So, that doesn't ever personally bother me, but I know some people definitely get quite sort of upset about.
Well, I like that you've embraced it, because essentially I think one of the things the internet really loves is that when an individual tries to stop something, like, like if I just like tell the internet, please don't call me Brian, like then it's all over. Yeah, it's like, come on, it's like, so it's like, that's always the funniest thing. It's that when you try to hide something, when you try to it's just best to embrace the meme and go forward and have fun with it. I've enjoyed the Shillup. That's so funny. Well, because
I just think it's such an important part of content creation. Like, anyone out there that is looking to go into content, like, you really just need to, in my view, just don't worry about like your haters. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're gonna have them no matter what. You can be the nicest dude out there. You can be so talented. Like, Donkey has so many haters, for example, because he talks shit about JRPGs. Like, JRPG stands fucking hate him. You know what I mean? They just make it their mission in life to bring him down. But like, that's okay. Donkey still does the best content on YouTube. He's still killing it. He's still crushing it every day. Like, he's not going to worry about those people. Jim Sterling to this day still goes out and prods people saying that Breath of the Wild is a shitty game. Like, he'll just throw in a random comment just purely because he gave, Breath of the Wild a 7 out of 10, and Zelda fans just can't deal. They just can't. And so they'll still come to his videos and berate him about that. So he'll keep prodding them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He doesn't care. Donkey doesn't care. I just think anyone that's serious about content creation, you're wasting time anytime you think about your haters, your detractors, whatever else. Definitely listen to feedback, I think. You need to like hear stuff that comes at you that is useful. Like, certainly with Greedfall, some people gave me feedback about like, hey man, I don't really think you focused enough on how small the team size is. And, I think that gives important context. And I'm like, you know what? You're absolutely right. In my Greedfall review, I probably should have hit that point harder, because it would have given more context to, the viewer, the audience, about why I feel this game is what it is, But other people that are just like, actually, this game is really good and you just don't know a good game when you see it. It's like, that's not helpful, and you can just ignore that kind of comment. Certainly, there's a lot of constructive stuff that comes from the comment section, and I do read a lot of it. Because I can't read all the comments, but I read a lot of them, and I definitely listen to that useful stuff when it comes through.
So, if they don't do a skip potion, at some point, Final Fantasy would have to end, because you would get to the point where the current player base thins out, and the ability to get somebody in is locked behind like 5,000 hours.
Right? Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, the answer is no. So it would be time to make another MMO. Okay, so leave Yoshi P at the helm, whoever you want.
I think Yoshi P deserves it, but yeah, go ahead.
What does Square Enix? What does that next MMO? What does that 16 look like?
I don't know. That's such an interesting question.
Is it Final Fantasy? I mean, it could be.
He could do anything. I'm just saying, like,
yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, oh man, it's a question I really struggle with in any regard, because I'm always so reluctant to try and tell a developer like what they should create, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right. But maybe phrase it like, what do you want? Like, if what do you want? Like, from a game?
I would
from
say,
an MMO?
yeah. I would say I think that their storytelling, and the thing that Final Fantasy has in terms of storytelling is obviously, I think, unmatched in the MMO genre. I haven't played all MMOs, clearly, but it's a single player experience that rivals numbered Final Fantasy entries that rivals, some of the best JRPGs I've ever played. The quality of the writing is up there with some of the best RPGs I've played. The music is up there unquestionably with some of the best games I've ever played. So I feel as though you'd be foolish to let that part of the experience go, right? But I do feel as though, coming back to this earlier point that we had about creating your own story, there's not a lot of agency within Final Fantasy 14 to be able to do that. And I don't know what that would look like for them. I don't know how they create that. But I do feel as though other things that push me out into the world that aren't boring ass daily quests, but other things that allow me to create experiences with my friends and create more organic stories, I think that would be interesting. PvP comes up a lot because it's a tension point that thrusts players together, and you get a lot of stories out of that. But I know not everyone likes PvP. One of the reasons people love Final Fantasy 14, I think, is because it's very, very focused on its PvE game. So if you were to go down that PvP path, it's obviously fraught with danger. But I just feel as though if they could create that sort of more organic sort of experience of like, cool, I've logged on today, I'm going to do some stuff and make some memories, right? If I could create more of those independent memories in Final Fantasy, I think that'd be a good addition to the formula. Again, I don't know what form that would take, but that's sort of where I'd look to direct my attention if I was a designer on that MMO.
I often, am curious and as I look and see things, because one of the things that I struggle with as a gamer is, and also like as a software engineer, like I study game development, I've dabbled in it. I've got friends who work in it. I see potential in that regards, like 1.0. Like, why did you stick around and play 1.0? And I go, oh, it was pretty bad. It's pretty awful. But there was this weird potential there that I was attracted to. Is that and it bit me with Anthem, because it's like, yeah, Anthem's not. People are like, oh, you were promoting it. I was like, I've never recommended it. Other people are like, should you get it? I go, no, but I don't know. Like, it just feels like maybe there's something there. Like,
there definitely is.
And I hope that maybe they turn it around. I don't know, but that's where it's like I see these sense of potential. And the same thing actually happened with Final Fantasy 15, where when you looked at the multiplayer aspect, like if you take out the insane load times, if you take out the always having to go back to town between little missions, all of a sudden it started to feel like this kind of has a Diablo-esque Final Fantasy feel, like, in Final Fantasy 15's combat system. And Yoshi P himself has expressed, his love, that like his passion project would be to work on Diablo 4. And it's like, I love that about him. I love that he's so like open and honest about like what he likes and is passionate about. And it's like, I wonder, like, with 7 Remake and everybody who's touched it praising the battle system, and that has alleviated my concern for that game. I was like, great. I'm wondering like, would they go some Diablo or more actiony game? Because when you look at the MMOs they have, and we don't have one here in the States, but we've got 11 still running, which is a very slow sandbox. You've got 14, very narrative, faster paced. You have Dragon Quest 11, which is a literal turn-based. Dragon Quest 10, literal turn-based MMO, but that's only in Japan. And I'm like, what fits into this ecosystem? And one of the things that Chris said to me today about WoW Classic is that you get 2 MMOs for the price of 1. And one thing we are seeing right now in the industry, and this will be my final question, and I'd like to get some final thoughts from you before we wrap up the podcast. One of the things we're seeing is we see Game Pass, we see Ubisoft doing these things, we see all of this stuff. There's a constant thing we see, and I'm sure you do, railing against microtransactions. You talked about it a bit with why is Microsoft doing it within Gears? Like it's a system seller. Why are you doing this? Gamers, I feel, have pretty much on point. Not like completely. Obviously, WoW has done well. 14 has done well with a subscription, but generally we have rejected a subscription model. For a game, you can really only have one, ultimately, unless you're insane like we are. And in that regards, we've seen the rise of loot boxes, microtransactions, all these different ways to try and capitalize and fund continuous game development, which gamers have said, laterally they don't like either. I see the solution being what kind of Blizzard's doing, what Microsoft's doing, what all these companies are doing is that you're not subscribing to one game, you're subscribing to a library. And I could see them doing that with Square Enix, saying like, here you go. Like, you just subscribe into our ecosystem and you're a part of it, and you can go and you can have a little bit of this today, have a little bit of that today, and enjoy that. And I see that actually as being what happens with the model going forward. And WoW Classic, WoW retail is an example of that thing, adding in that value proposition to the player. What are your thoughts regarding the state of essentially the subscription as it exists for WoW and for 14?
Yeah, I just feel like in life in general, we're reaching saturation point with subscriptions, and gaming hasn't even really begun yet. Like, we've got some, but we certainly don't have them all. But like, I don't know, you look at music, for example, you've got Spotify, okay? Do you subscribe to Spotify? Most people don't. They just get the free option. If you did, would you also subscribe to a different one? Probably not. Most people have Netflix, and they've got like Amazon Prime or whatever, which gives them Amazon, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Would you also subscribe to a third one? Maybe we all subscribe to HBO during Game of Thrones. Are we still subscribed to it now? I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just feel as though more and more of life is requesting these subscriptions from us. And it's just going to, at some point, add up, and it's going to be a bit too crazy, particularly in the world of gaming, because we've got like music, for example, where I can get everything on Spotify. There's not going to be a service like that for video games. Like, it's going to be each individual publisher asking $5 to $10 a month. That's going to become unsustainable, I think, for a lot of people. I think what will then happen is that people will be judicious with their choice of subscription. So they'll subscribe to Microsoft this month for Gears and then not next month. So what does that mean for Microsoft? I think they're going to look at their games as the starter packs, and they're going to have to leverage more deeply into microtransactions, because they can't rely on the $60 sale price, because they only made $5 off that consumer for Gears 5. So if they want to engage and sort of like make their long tail revenue, then it's going to need to be through more microtransactions. So I feel as though the streaming thing is actually going to be quite disruptive. Or sorry, the subscription thing going to be quite disruptive in terms of game design going forward, because the developers need to make their money. If they're not making it on the $60 box price, and consumers will not be subscribing to every single publisher's thing, they need to make their money somewhere else. And I fear that it will be microtransactions. It's my concern.
I think it's a logical tool to pull out of the box. It works, and if it works, then they're going to use it. I mean, why would they put a tool back in the box that doesn't work? For the big studios, the ones that really have the leverage, the Microsofts, the Activisions, the EAs of the world that have a whole portfolio under their hub where people are playing multiple of their games, that maybe, for somebody who doesn't pay attention to publisher, they may not even realize that, oh my gosh, those came out under the same umbrella, because they're so diverse, especially when you look at like EA, where you can pick up two games that are very different and EA still getting their piece. I think that something like the EA Origin system or something could work as a generation that, at least here in the US, has worked very hard to cut the cable. So we've worked very hard to get ourselves off cable packages, which was creeping up to that. I mean, it was building to this point where they've got us up for like $100 a month, and then we cut it, and we all got this $100 a month back in our pocket, and it was wonderful. And then we put $15 on Netflix, and then $15 on HBO Now, and then $15 to whatever Activision's thing is, or whatever MMO you play, or whatever. And it's like, next thing you know, if they start partnering up and they start saying your Xbox Game Pass and your Netflix can be combined for just $22, it's like, am I not just building my own cable package again? Now, I don't see that as a reason why they wouldn't do it. I just see it as a very subtle way. It's like, wow, we are really looping back around to where we were 10 years ago. Like, we're exactly in the same point. We just accidentally got there all over again.
For sure.
It's gonna be interesting. I've always kind of said over the next 20 years at gaming, the landscape of gaming, I wish I knew what was going to happen. I have a feeling I know what's going to be coming down the pipeline, but it'll be interesting to see if it ultimately plays out. Skill, do you have where can people find you? What do you got coming on? I don't want to pressure you on any kind of date for your 14 review. I do want to send you like a case of energy drinks or something, because
well, I always said with Final Fantasy, like, I don't want to rush it, and I wanted to spend a few weeks at the end game. Like, I wanted to get at least one savage kill under my belt. I've got, I've killed Innocence and Titania now on Extreme. I've now done crafting at the most basic level, so I understand what that is. I'm just about to unlock like Hunt Train stuff, and That's probably the only thing I haven't really touched is PvP, But either way, I've got another 100 hours now at the end game. I really get it. Like my character's 453 eye level. I'll get my weapon soon, etc. So I'm there. Like I know what it feels like to play the end game of Final Fantasy right now, and that's the point where I'm feeling comfortable to write and like start putting it together. I wanted to get it done before Borderlands 3 came out and Destiny 2, the Shadowkeep, but that didn't happen. Just wasn't enough time.
Yeah.
So I'm probably going to look to do this sometime in December, I'd say, when things calm down, like release cycle slows and
You'll also have 5.1. And with that, there's going to be
5.1 as well. But is that this year or is that next year?
That's this year. Like most likely, most likely October or maybe early November. Late October, early November kind of time frame. Yeah. And that you also get there's going to be a new raid. There's going to and that's where we start to see the near apocalypse. That's going to be really cool. And so like it's going to be cool for you to actually kind of experience that, because one of the things Chris said, because having always been, I feel like I've been a part of it, like Yoshi P and the team, they produce like pretty substantial content drops regularly. Like it's you could set pretty much a clock to it. So it's gonna be interesting. I was like, I don't envy you. I'm appreciative
I don't know
of
how
you.
That's gonna work.
I'm appreciative of you for you taking the time, right? Because it's like, I saw some people in chat, kind of bemoaning Lazy Peon, and we invited him on the podcast. And if he ends up, having time, like I'd love to talk to him. I actually, like, I have no issue with his review, because I think as long as you state like, this is what I did and here's my perspective, like that, you know that immediately, as you're not like falsifying, like I've put 10,000 hours in this game. And it's like, no, like that would be fake. But it's like, if you're like, I skipped, I don't know, like this isn't my thing.
For
like,
sure.
Okay, well, you had a bad experience, but anybody knows that about that now.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think with Lesbian, I actually tweeted at him. I'm like, dude, I really appreciated your review because it was just honest. Like I didn't agree with it, that's for sure. But it takes a lot of guts to just sort of put your view out there and just sort of say, here's what I think about things. And he did that. It's not easy to do that on the internets. So he did, but like, as I said, I think it came back to that point I was making earlier, where I feel like he didn't really engage the community enough. And I feel like that's where he had some big holes in his review, where if he did engage the community, they would really sort of set you straight on that stuff and be like, well, actually, no, that's not the case. For X, Y, and Z reason. And I think he would have arrived at a better product. That's the risk you take when you sort of engage these sorts of games with big, passionate communities with lots to get into. There's just so much content to wrap your head around. It's so difficult. And I think you need to have the community help guide you through that process, or you're going to fall into some very easy pitfalls.
Chris, where can people find us? What are you working on?
They can find us right here. I am leveling up some more stuff in 14, starting to come back, starting to kind of ease myself back in for 5.1. So I've been logging in every day this week, and I've been kind of taking a break and then still working through Classic. It's a lot of, it's so much. It's such a fun trip down memory lane, seeing what I remember accurately and what I don't, because it really is just vanilla re-released. So like sometimes you're like, this is how it works, and then you get there, you're like, no, it's not. And other things, it's exactly where you left it. I mean, it is 100%. You're like, oh, right around this corner, this is what happens, and there it is. I find myself automatically completing quests that I already know where to go because I've done this process. So I'm really enjoying that trip down memory lane, and I don't think it's just a nostalgia thing, and I think that because I see people like Brian enjoying the game, but I do think that for those of us that nostalgia is a factor, of course it plays a role. I just don't think that discounts at all. Like, I enjoy nostalgia, I enjoy watching old movies, so I'm having a blast.
And for myself, I just finished leveling Machinist, and I have to say, Summoner is dead to me, which breaks my heart. I've been a summoner since 2.0, since they came out, and just have loved. I love pet classes, and I just played Machinist, and they got it so right. And so I'm working on building out my controller guide for playing the Machinist. I'm still not done. I got to put it through a lot of tests. I appreciate everybody's patience, because they're like, "When's this coming?" I'm like, they take time. It's not just about laying out the skills. It's about here's these skills, and they do the same thing on these other jobs. So I put them in the same spot, and hopefully they make sense. They got to make sense. Otherwise, you do have to have exceptions to the rule from time to time. But playing on a controller, especially with 14, it's so much about muscle memory. Because it's not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, time to repeat this new rotation. No, you got to have muscle memory. Otherwise, you're going to get eaten alive. But I prefer the controller. And that's where it's like, that's what I do miss. Like in WoW Classic, I'm like, man, if somebody does do a mod, I might play it on controller. Yeah, and so I'm working on that next. I'm leveling up Red Mage. That's why I put out a poll for the community. They voted for Red Mage. I'm excited about that. So I was testing out a little bit. I had it at 70. So now we do the whole process over and over and over again. We'll have them all finished up by the time 6.0 comes out. And
all over again.
And do it all over again. Thank God I like this game. Next week, guys, we have Az, like we said, from Heel versus Babyface coming back on talking WoW Classic as a focus. He said that he wasn't going to get it, and then he did, and that's just makes me so happy. And I've seen his tweets, and he's absolutely in love with it. And so it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of nerd out. I'm going to play some Classic this week and try to get higher so I can have a better perspective. But last week we said we had Spofi on, and then we've got a couple other really awesome guests lined up. Skill Up, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. We're worlds apart, but I really appreciate everything you do and all the content that you produce. So you keep it up. And thank you.
You guys, as I said, really make really great stuff and found it super useful during my journey. So yeah, keep it on as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right. For Work to Game, my name is Brian.
It's Chris.
My name's Skillup.
Yes.
We're jamming. We're doing it.
Jamming it. We're rocking it. I like it because it had a slight inflection with a little like is this okay?
Right.
Yeah. You got it. Thank you so much for watching this podcast. Like we said, you can check it out on all the podcast world, and be sure to leave us a rating, and we will see you next time.